So for today's video, we're going to do something just a little bit different. I've had this idea for a while, and it's reacting to medical videos, mental health videos, things that relate to anxiety, avoidant personality, mental health, and just providing my thoughts on those issues. There was a comment somebody left on one of my videos the other day that really kind of stuck out to me. It was seeing ourselves in each other and how we can use that information to help us overcome whatever insecurities that we have. And I think that's extremely true, is that we can use our experiences and be brave enough to share those. And here it's easy to share it because I'm in a room by myself talking to the camera. So it's easy enough to share this information to a camera and again, see who resonates with the information. Do you see yourself in my experience? And can you, if you feel like it, share your experience below so that we can see what commonalities we have? Because I think that sharing those commonalities and those things that we have about our journeys that are the same helps pull us out of our own heads and helps us to form connections. So for this video, I'm going to react to Medcircle. I know this lady. I've seen this lady around. I don't know who she is exactly, Dr. Ramani, but she gives some information and insights onto mental health issues, disorders, things of that nature. And this video is 8 signs of avoidant personality disorder and how to spot them. Without further ado, let's get into the video.
Now, avoidant personality in some ways can be thought of as a much more pervasive, consistent, and potentially severe social anxiety.
Yeah,
People with avoidant
just from that, I want to express my thoughts on the extent to which we may be suffering from our own mental disorders or insecurities. My understanding is that we don't have to be saddled with our disorder for forever. There may be some research out there that indicates maybe we are in this for the longer term, but we do deal with our mental challenges, perhaps on an intermittent level. Maybe we deal with it for a certain period of time and then we don't deal with it as much, or there are certain situations that might trigger it worse than others. And so it's kind of interesting to me right off the bat is that there are degrees of this disorder. And I don't want to minimize anybody's experience of having dealt with severe or extreme avoidant personality disorder or social anxiety or mental health. I know that, again, there are certain situations where I will go through a heavy battle of, dealing with an avoidant personality and just kind of being a shut-in. So, there's levels to it. And I find it interesting that that's how she decides to start this conversation.
And it's a sort of an unfortunately named personality style. People with avoidant personality don't necessarily want to avoid people. They actually value social interaction, but the social interactions bring up so much anxiety because there's a fear of criticism, of being rejected, of being embarrassed or humiliated or being sort of judged or disapproved by other people.
Yeah, that's a really pervasive part for me is imagining scenarios where if I walk into this space, I'm actually going to be perceived negatively, or the negative judgment has really already happened, and I'm just going to walk into it and take that on as soon as I enter the room. And more often than not, it's really more of a perceived scenario that again hasn't taken place, and I think it's that perception of something bad happening in the future that really causes the social anxiety and the avoidance of social situations. So very interesting.
As a result, one sign we see in people who have avoidant personality is that they may avoid engaging in any kind of activity socially, in the workplace, meeting new people that carries that risk of being criticized or rejected. People with avoidant personality styles aren't asocial. They actually do socialize, but they tend to socialize in.
Before she finishes her thought, I get very nervous. So I'm thinking of an event where I was at, I was working a corporate job, and it was a social thing. I mean, there was food, and everybody was going to be there, and everybody's gathered in the same place. So in my mind, right now, looking back and reflecting on it, I think a lot of people are uncomfortable or are like, man, okay, this is something that we have to do. We have to walk into this corporate environment in this setting and socialize. It's kind of a drag. The blood pressure rises. And I think there is a certain sort of, our adrenaline will kick in and prepare us for this fight or flight response to a social situation. Now, for me, what I understand what I was dealing with at that point was dreading walking into this situation and not wanting to, not wanting, just, I hated the thought of having to interact with people. And it was this, I'm going to be judged. People are going to judge my speech, judge not just what I talk about, if I had anything interesting to say, but judge how I talked, and maybe pick up some things about me that I didn't like about how my voice sounded. And they're going to pick up on that right away. And they're going to also like, oh, why do you sound like that? I'm very insecure about my voice. So it was these things where I imagined what was going to happen in this situation before I even walked into the room. I think I was humiliated in the past before and didn't care for this social situation. And so I projected that past experience onto this future one. Again, something that didn't even happen yet. So very interesting.
Very small groups. So another sign we'll see is that it's not that the avoidant person doesn't socialize or doesn't have friends, but they tend to keep a rather small and tight social group, only staying within the social group within which they are familiar, maybe friends they've had for a long time, family members, and there's a real reluctance and I should say fear of meeting new people because of that fear of criticism.
Yeah, huge fear of criticism. It's not that I didn't want to go to this group function. I absolutely did. And I wanted to interact and be carefree and kind of flow throughout the room and just kind of, and I've started to think of that more. Anytime I have to socially interact is maybe trying to get better at at entering conversations and exiting conversations, and not maybe being so fixated on, I like real intense conversations, but I think that for certain social interactions, it kind of requires this flow where you have to just be in the conversation, be in the moment, and decide, okay, I'm going to go where this conversation takes us, but I don't have to stay somewhere. I can absolutely remove myself from a situation. With that said, I understand what it's like to kind of stand there and feel paralyzed, where you like, well, if I turn around and leave, it's going to be more awkward than if I stay here with nothing to say, with this blank look on my face. And then what ends up happening, I think what in reality ends up happening, is you do stand there and you make it more awkward because of this internal battle that we're having in our heads. And I can remember these conversations that I had, or that I've tried to put myself into, where it just felt like I'm putting so much pressure on myself to perform that it kind of ruins the interaction for me and ruins the sense of, wow, I really failed that interaction. And again, it's not that I don't want to be social, but it's like I'm grading myself during the conversations and giving myself an F after every interaction, which isn't fair to me. So if you're doing that, understand that it's not fair to yourself. It's easy to say that. It's not as easy to stop doing the behavior.
People who have avoidant personality also hold back in intimate relationships. So they will be, for example, very afraid to share about themselves because they're afraid of being made fun of, that what they're sharing will be humiliating or embarrassing. So one sign we'd see is that a person who gets into a relationship with someone with an avoidant personality might find they're not learning a lot about this person. Or if anything, the person with the avoidant personality may just sort of keep going along with whatever they say and agree and actually ask a lot about the other person, but
I
not.
was just going to say that I like to ask more questions about the other person than I like to reveal about myself. And it's a self-judgment where I don't like things about myself. Therefore, everything I don't like about myself is bad. So I do not share. I like to ask questions because then the other person feels more important in my mind. The other person feels more important. They're able to, it's part of me is like, am I just stealing and taking information from them? It feels like it's not fair to the other person that I'm holding back and that I'm not asking questions and that I'm not being forthright. It's not that I'm lying, but I'm withholding a lot of my information. Then when I ask, well, what about you? Then it's like, okay, then the room gets hot and my face, I feel like flushes and my body temperature raises up to an uncomfortable level and I start sweating. I sweat a lot. It's disgusting. I need a sponsor, a deodorant sponsor on this channel, but it's crazy because I understand that flushed feeling stemming from not wanting to reveal about myself and then feeling like when I'm put on the spot in that situation. So tell me about you. Whoosh, it just flows. Oh, it just comes right over me. And I literally feel my body temperature rise in that situation. It's embarrassing.
And what's driving that, again, is sort of that fear of being rejected. People with avoidant personality also, like any anxious person, they kind of get stuck in a rumination and a preoccupation of being rejected. So imagine a person with avoidant personality is about to go to a bar with friends, which would already be a stretch for them, or go to a networking event, there will be a lot of time spent even ahead of that ruminating about what's going to go wrong. I don't want to say the wrong thing. And even while in the event, will very much be in their head about, okay, I got to compose my sentence. I have to make eye contact. I have to not say the wrong thing. And there'll be so much anxiety. In fact, many people with an avoidant personality will say, my face will turn red. I'll start sweating. And they're just so
Not
afraid of
funny.
being ridiculed or rejected in any kind of social setting.
What's unfortunate about that is I remember a moment where my sister and I, we're very close. We'd gone to a social gathering, and my insecurities and my fears, I feel like I was talking to her so intensely and maybe transferring some of my anxiety and that adrenaline and that nervous energy onto her, because I was like, well, aren't you afraid of what these people are going to think? And who do we talk to? Do we stick close together? We're going to go get food, blah, blah, blah. And I was just talking a million miles a minute and really playing out these negative scenarios in my head where I was just super nervous. And like the doctor said, feeling that flush and that sweat and that heat, very uncomfortable. Now, I'm trying to think if this happens lately, and I don't know that I've been social enough to even be able to assess whether or not that has happened more lately. And what sucks is that I think there's a lot of stuff that happened within the last few years globally that has kind of shut everybody inside to the point where human interactions, maybe, for me at least, and maybe people who are just different in that way, different, with maybe a social fear, don't get the opportunities to socialize more because it's super comfortable, and we found ways to, with remote work, we're kind of able to kind of stay in our own bubbles in a sense and interact digitally, which again, I crave that face-to-face human interaction. I don't necessarily crave being inside all the time behind a computer. It's weird. It's just weird. And I may have mentioned this in a previous video before, but again, I like to give speeches. I like to talk into a microphone. I like to present. So it's this weird dynamic of there's that presentation, that artistry that I love, that I crave, that I want to I want to be in front of people and share and talk and XYZ. But then it's at the same time, as soon as somebody asks about me, I can there's instances where I'm with somebody and at dinner and at the dinner table, so tell me about yourself, and again that rush of nervousness just comes over me. She's nailing it. And I'm just, how many people who don't have avoidant personality struggle with this stuff? I don't know. I see I can talk to somebody else. I think the only person I've talked to about this that's related to me, or the only person I've talked to about this has been related to me. And so I asked my sister if she's dealt with some of these things, and there was a yeah, to a certain extent, but I haven't talked to normal people, other people. Do you deal with this as well? And to what extent? And we're going back to then the extremes and the lesser extremes of feeling these emotional or dealing with these mental health issues. How do normal people deal with this type of situation? And do they feel this or do they not? So again, super interesting video. Great questions, great signs as well.
And another sign we see is that people who have avoidant personalities are very inhibited when they get into a new social situation. So they'll be very quiet. They may sort of stay behind, stand back.
Yep.
They may sort of, kind of nod and smile and go along. And in this way, there's sometimes a vulnerability for people who have avoidant personality styles, similar to what we see in people who are socially anxious, that in social situations, there may be a propensity or a risk, for example, for wanting to drink so that they feel more socially disinhibited, because their natural tendency is to be quite inhibited in those situations.
I've stopped drinking. I do not like to drink. I haven't had a sip of alcohol in 2 years. I just do not like the feeling of drinking, being drunk, being tipsy even. I mean, in high school, I used to drink underage and be very, let me just throw one back. Let me throw one back. And I would get drunk at family parties, and it would be awful because I'd be throwing up in the hotel rooms and passed out, and somebody's knocking at the door trying to get in, and I can't get up to open the door because I'm passed out on the couch. Not good. And so I don't even like to drink anymore. I like to be clear-headed. No kind of any substances. I've cut all them out to the extent that I can, and I can maintain that self-control. We're gonna keep going. But for alcohol, I'm just like, no, I don't want to do that. Because I think it does help with certain social things, so social situations where you can feel that inhibitions go. You're not afraid of anything anymore, and you can interact more. But I'd rather go into these situations level-headed and try to figure out how to interact, but with my own faculties on my own, without the help of alcohol or any kind of intoxicant.
A person with avoidant personality, let me tell you this right now, they ain't going to do karaoke because it's very uncomfortable for a person with an avoidant personality to think about doing something where they may embarrass themselves, like doing karaoke or doing something like that's in front of other people where they may embarrass themselves or they think they'll look silly even though they won't. They'd be very reluctant, for example, maybe to give a toast or a speech at a wedding or other social event.
I've never done karaoke. The less I know people who are in the room doing karaoke or watching, the less likely I am to go forward and try that out. Although I have given 2 best man speeches at weddings. Those went by okay. Of course, a lot of self-judgment afterwards. Did I do okay? Did I not? A lot of replaying the events to that extent. But like I said, I actually, there's a part of me that really likes the spotlight and likes to be on. So, that's where I'm thinking, do I have avoidant personality to a less severe degree, or am I dealing with something else? And it's not always clear because, like the doctor said here, you won't do karaoke at all. And I'm like, okay, maybe I'm not on the extreme end of the spectrum here, but there is a part of me that thinks, well, you're really, maybe you're just dealing with social anxiety to a very high degree. So interesting insight.
With the fear being not that they think that they don't have anything to say, but that they will be made fun of and then that they will embarrass themselves. There's a risk for people with avoidant personality in some ways because, again, a person with avoidant personality is not disinterested in social relationships. They're actually interested. They do want to meet people. They do want to be with people. The anxiety and the rumination about looking foolish or becoming humiliated or criticized or embarrassed inhibits them. But there's a risk that they'll sort of give in a close personal relationship. Several years ago in my research lab, we had done some research, and one thing we found, for example, is that people with avoidant personality styles were more likely to engage in sexual practices that were more unsafe, not protecting themselves with new partners. And it was very interesting to us because we thought that we'd see that with more dysregulated personality styles. But one thing that seemed to be happening was folks with avoidant personalities would simply give in and not even advocate for themselves because they wanted to be in something, but they didn't want to say something in a situation for fear of being criticized or embarrassed.
Yeah, so that part I can understand to an extent. I've dealt with situations before where I didn't want to speak up and, like she said, advocate for yourself. I didn't want to speak up because it was, well, what is this other person going to think if I'm the person saying no? In one-on-one situations, I think it's easier for me to advocate for myself and for the other person. In group settings, there might be a little bit more pressure to just kind of go with the flow and go with the crowd and to just like, oh, okay, well, whatever. So I would like to get better at that aspect of being able to say, no, I'm not comfortable with this. I'm not going to do it. I will sit this one out. But again, I can understand that thought process of let's just do it because everybody else is doing it and I don't want to be the odd one out.
But there's also, for a person with an avoidant personality, there can be so many lost opportunities. Because a person may be very, very capable, but may hold off on, for example, advocating for themselves in the workplace or putting themselves up for a promotion of some kind, especially if that promotion may require them to be more heavily scrutinized. So there's a risk for people with avoidant personalities to get stuck in situations that probably aren't at the level of their actual abilities because the anxiety and the fear of criticism and all of that holds them back.
I want to get to a point where I'm just deciding like, hey, I want better for myself. I want to put myself out there more. And I've been lucky enough to where I have that drive to want to put myself out there to certain extents that I've built up enough of a reputation to try to go after bigger and higher opportunities, but I can see myself in past experiences where I'm in a meeting, in a creative meeting, and everybody in the room is talking and I'm quiet. And it's like you can hear a pin drop because I don't. That's my perception is everybody is noticing how quiet I am and how I'm just not speaking up or saying anything. And I feel like that has held me back in certain situations. Now, I will say that I've tried to use that to my advantage, where I will take that and try to take better notes and try to be a little bit more perceptive, and not necessarily think that my not using my voice is an obstacle, but thinking what else can I do that's different than from using my voice that can still help the situation, maybe move a project forward, give people additional insights maybe after the fact, and to show them, oh, he was quiet, but maybe he was actually listening. He wrote down all these notes, and yeah, it does make sense. He was there. He's a great note taker, blah, blah, blah. So again, trying to maybe compensate for the fear of speaking up and talking, and using other tools at your disposal to your advantage. So writing things down, taking better notes, being a good listener, stuff like that.
So when I've seen avoidant personality styles in my practice, it's always a little bit difficult to discern with whether I'm dealing with a social anxiety or an avoidant personality. And in some ways, I got to be honest with you, it doesn't really matter. The approach is sort of similar. It's really with avoidant personality styles, it's much more consistent. And it's really about doing sort of successive approximations using cognitive behavioral techniques to sort of help the person have a more realistic appraisal of what's happening in a social situation, and then start taking small, like little baby steps in terms of social risks that a person will take, paying attention to how they feel in their body, and then almost journaling about it, and then talking about it in therapy, and then leveling up. But one thing we also want to keep in mind too is that when we look at any personality style, we'd want to know what came before it. And sometimes people who have avoidant personality styles, we may sometimes see childhoods where there might have been bullying, trauma, or even sort of shame or humiliation used as a tool of sort of discipline and control in the family they grew up in. So part of the therapeutic work also becomes about sort of them understanding how those patterns are still affecting them.
Man, the emotional gap that I felt between parents, the bullying I experienced at school, the disassociation or the disconnect I felt from my peers, especially my male peers, I definitely feel those things, and have experienced that. And so, again, I think we're at the end of this video here. We'll wrap it up in a second, but I think the biggest points here, the things that the doctor has touched on, having that behavioral therapy where you're taking little steps and trying to build up a foundation where you do feel stronger and more secure within yourself, that makes sense to me. And perhaps that's, part of the reason why I like doing presentations so much, is because that does give me a good way to still continue to put myself out there and feel less risk, where the presentations I put together YouTube videos. So I have another channel where I teach tech information and how to create better presentations, which is kind of funny. But it's really the tech behind how to do certain things in your Google Docs and slides and sheets. But I've used that I've used the camera, and I've used that love of presenting and talking, and put the camera out in front of me, have the microphone here, do some screen recordings, and use that as kind of my tools and my ways to build up my own self-confidence, and still put myself out there and not letting the social anxiety and avoidance take over and control. Now, I'm not where I want to be in life yet, but I have used these things as tools to kind of help to build me up to the point where I can get comfortable and I can do the things that I desire to do in an in-person setting versus just doing things behind the camera. Yeah, so we're going to be checking out more from Dr. Ramani. I thought this was a great, quick 7-minute video on the 8 points of social or avoidant personality disorders. So this was, again, a different format for me for content. My goal here is to share these insights and to build better relationships with you as you're watching these, by way of sharing my experience and hopefully connecting with other people who have experienced similar things and letting you know you're not alone out there. I would like to feel like I'm not alone. And so it's really helpful when you guys share your experience with me and let me know that, hey, yes, I've dealt with this too, and here's the extent that I've dealt with it. And, hearing when somebody says, when I read that this sharing my experiences help them, it's huge for me, because there was a long time where I was like, man, I really feel alone in this. And this is really helping me to connect with people in ways that I didn't think was necessarily possible. So again, if you have subscribed, thank you for joining in. Thank you for watching, and thank you for listening. This is beneficial for me. If you like this style of video, let me know in the comments if there was anything that jumped out at you as far as my experience that you resonated with. Please let me know that as well. I would love to connect with you down below. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks again, Socially Awkward Cub. Let me know what you think about this this channel name. I'm thinking about changing it. I don't know if I like the Cub thing so much anymore. But yeah, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next video.